I'm Tim Ventura, here with John Hutchison from Vancouver, BC. John has been working on a variety of unique technologies over the years. He's most well known for the Hutchison Effect, which is actually a collection of very unique effects that are currently either unexplained or poorly explained by science. John, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly, Tim. Pleasure talking with you.
Great. Well, thanks for your time. I definitely, wouldn't miss the opportunity to interview you. You have some of the most unique effects in science as far as the Hutchison effect, to begin with, is a much larger scale than anything else out there. And it's also more unique, has more facets than probably anything else that I've seen. Could you tell me a little bit about what the Hutchison effect actually is, or what it would be exhibited as?
Well, sure, Tim. It started way back in 1980 when I made a chance discovery after replicating a lot of Tesla's work and other scientists' work back in that time period. And basically, try and put it simply, it's the Hutchison effect named by scientists around the world back at that time period, actually. Well, let's see, how can I start here? Where can I start? Okay, it's happens to deal with momentary levitations of any materials from a few ounces to up to about 1,500 pounds was tested by Boeing in 1989.
Oh, okay.
And it also includes effects happening at a distance from the equipment, such things as metal going transparent, metal going into rubbery kind of materials and into unknown compositions of alloys and this kind of thing, is some of the aspects of the Hutchison effect.
Well, it's very unique. At one point, I actually had a short piece of video. You did a lot of filming in the 1980s with some of the most obvious and larger scale effects, and I had maybe a 15-second clip, and it almost looked like it was backwards. So I played the tape backwards, and it actually looked backwards both ways. And I actually believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was taken during the time or around the time you'd been working with the U.S. government. Didn't they send over a research team to work with that?
Yes, that was approximately 1983. It was a 4-month program that the Reagan administration was highly interested in it because they felt that the Soviet Union was doing something similar. So we worked away at that and had all kinds of effects happen. However, on their records or the videotapes, they say that nothing happened and attributed the effects to PK, which is just basically government government whitewashing it if they're interviewed on TV and that kind of thing. So that was that, and then of course they went back to Los Alamos National Laboratories, where the colonel, I'll just call him the colonel, was rather upset over the whole incident, plus the team from Los Alamos, and then calling McDonnell Douglas Aerospace Corporation to do a secondary test, which was not classified, and I have the videos and test results, but it was, again, whitewashed as PK. And then after that, the Canadian government, and then after that, the German government, and then Boeing Aerospace, and so on and so forth. So I've had my adventures with that in that area anyhow.
Yeah. It's and the explanation of PK or psychokinesis really, in some ways, doesn't seem to hold. It's such a large-scale effect. And more recent investigations, like I know that Nick Cook had dropped by a while ago and interviewed you, kind of indicate a renewed interest and kind of a belief that this is something that it's really based on your expertise and your knowledge of these systems and not some strange, unexplained psychic effect that might be being amplified.
Yeah, that's basically true. I mean, I don't know. Well, I guess the government wants to protect whatever interests, I don't know, by just simply calling it PK. We're still after the Canadian government's report back in '86. They did send out part of the report. It was a matter of national security, according to my member of parliament.
Sure.
And I didn't get the videos back yet, but I'm pressing the issue by posting on the forum, fantastic forum, all the names and that of the scientists in Ottawa, Canada, that were involved, and because I do wish to have those videos to add to my collection of interesting videos, I guess you'd call it.
Well, one of the things that had surprised me was when I talked to you a few days ago, you'd mentioned that you were actually unable to turn the equipment up to full power and really demonstrate the effect because you now have all of your equipment actually stored in an apartment. And by doing so, it actually creates effects throughout the entire apartment complex.
Yeah, not only that, I found out later during a TV show that it actually carries on within a city block or two. And unfortunately, a tenant above me here had to be taken away by the New Westminster Police Department because he is ranting and raving that they got technology down there and they got camera people down there. And unfortunately, the poor guy was taken away by the police. And that was when I was doing an experiment with Griffin Films, when I was trying to levitate a toy UFO. I had to put on it at that time a string, actually, and then just got some random effects. But prior to that, I was able to actually levitate the thing when I had less equipment in here without any strings attached, so to speak. And it was quite an impressive levitation for Fox television. But as more equipment comes in here, of course, then all the fields get jumbled, and even the access to the equipment to operate everything, it's impossible by the time you try and set anything up. It's just, you're totally exhausted, and of course the fields are not the same. And I think it's my prolific collection of Navy equipment that has interfered in the area of this research, and also it's an apartment. So every time I turn the equipment on, guess who knocks? The New Westminster Police Department.
Unfortunately. Now, do you think that do you think there's a possibility that you might be able to move back into another lab in the future and start doing some of the larger scale effects?
Oh, I'd love to do that. I would like to get out of this place. How can you explain it? It's not the best for also spiritual growth in this kind of environment.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah, and the size and just the proximity to people makes it difficult. But if like one of the ideas that had popped into my mind was maybe a tractor trailer, and then you could drive it to wherever and have the equipment already set up. Not sure if that would be a good idea, or maybe just another lab somewhere that's a little bit more remote, and whatever strange effects that happen could really be kind of identified in an environment without surrounding population.
Very well put point there, Tim, because that's what I used to do before I went off to Germany for those 2 years. The main lab was stolen basically by the Canadian government when I was away in Germany. And we were doing experiments on analysis of all the metal samples in Germany, and they had expressed their interest in the Hutchison Effect equipment. But to move out would be quite a thing. Of course, need a lot of funding to do it.
Oh, sure. You have tons and tons, quite literally several tons of equipment.
Well, more like, I guess, 6 or 8 tons. Although the mayor of New Westminster expressed high interest in this when all heck broke loose last year in regards to my balcony and radiation stuff and everything else there. That turned into quite a actually interesting adventure, and it was publicized on Art Bell's radio show with a JPEG image of the infamous balcony. But it got the mayor's attention. He looked into some of the background work I did and knew some of my friends for 30 years, and basically expressed interest in trying to get a location for me.
Well,
but that hasn't transpired yet, so I don't know. I've been getting a lot of interesting emails from folks in the United States that would like to set me up down there, which I wouldn't mind doing.
Yeah.
And demonstrate some of these interesting effects again.
Yeah, one of the advantages of, if you were able to recreate some of the effects that I'd seen, and again, coming from a very brief clip of footage that seems to make it back onto the TV channels quite regularly now, is, it shows a bowling ball levitating. One of the most impressive was a glass of water spontaneously lifting off. But the interesting thing for me was not only does the glass lift off and fly away, but the water actually lifts off out of the glass. So you actually have two objects accelerating at different speeds out of the picture frame. But, that and then room temperature spontaneous melting. There's really no better word for it, of metals. just, incredible effects. These are things that, having worked with the lifter technology, I've seen some very interesting things, but nothing of this scale, and nothing even remotely close. The most I've seen are as I've said before, I've had 1 pound of payload on my 4-foot lifter, and I've had it 10 feet up in the air, and it flies very well. But, I've never had a bowling ball spontaneously lift off, which is, to my mind, just incredibly amazing stuff.
I thought it was an iron ball. I mean, different TV people get the story mixed up. It was about 70-pound cannonball.
Oh, okay.
It was floating around, but also there's no connections. During the real Hutchison Effect experiments, there's no direct connections or any magnetic fields below or over top the test object. It's all done at a distance and up to, let's see, it was measured out at 300 feet away, the effects even happen. That was by a Los Alamos National Labs staff member.
Well,
measures something about 300 feet from the main test area.
One of the things that I've had, and again, this is just kind of an opinion from having seen a lot of the footage, is having read a fair amount about scalar fields, and having read some of Tom Bearden's work and some of the other popular literature about scalars, one of the things that it would appear like, based on, in some ways, the almost random effects that happen with the Hutchison effect, are one of the limitations, I guess, again, for a populated area is the unpredictability of it. And it seems like these scalar fields, based on factors that I clearly don't understand, really seem to overlap and increase and then cause these effects in very specific areas. Do you have any idea about predicting them for the future, or any way to really, any methods for controlling or enhancing them?
Oh, I had actually in the late 80s a lot of control mechanisms for controlling the fields, and they were pretty constant. They would sometimes work away on an object for, about 15 minutes. So I have a rough idea on what is needed, because when I started out in this, it was very random, and I would only get maybe some effects that were dramatic maybe within many hours. Then as time progressed and I got more involved with replicating a lot of the machinery into more advanced stuff like vacuum tube technology and RF fields work and electrostatic works, that I started to get more consistent levitations and effects and stuff like that.
Well, the big question, I guess, myself being somewhat of an inventor, and I know that there are inventors all over the world that are just, consistently amazed by your work, is if someone wanted to pursue this, what kind of equipment would they need, and what kind of, not really just the methodology, but, what's the thought process that you go through when you're creating these effects?
Well, okay, when I started way out back in 1979 and through the 70s, I was replicating all of Tesla's machines just because it was interest to me, with no expectations until, I turned the stuff on at night and observed the interesting lightning effects from the static generators and also the Tesla coils. So I would recommend, in starting out, basically with Tesla technology and high voltage DC work, along with electrostatics, and you'll see that there's some interesting effects start to happen. So you have to work your way into it, like I did over a long period of time.
Well, a lot
involved a lot of equipment and field shaping equipment and static technology and that.
A lot of the work that you've done involves different frequencies. Have you found really a correlation? Do you think there might be a magic frequency if people were shooting for this to attempt to work with, or maybe a collection of frequencies to shape the fields?
Oh, yes, for sure. There's the fields I started to use way back then were 450 kilocycles, RF, CW. Then I went into 750 kilocycles, Tesla waves, scalar type tech. That was a constant voltage out, and radio frequencies, I should say, also. But it was very strong and intense, and not visible sparks, because sparks cause problems. And then, of course, I had around 14 megacycles. Then later on, up to 21 centimeters were some of the basic frequencies I used. And they were recorded actually by George Hathaway, who was my partner and is sort of still my partner in some ways in all of this for all these years. And we had a lot of fun with the measurements of the fields and that. And but we found out that the RF itself is not the main operators of anything. It's a combination of them that seems to open up some type of dimensional doorway or effect with gravity that seems to twist it and bend it around where it puts a shield across anything and stuff will take off into the air, which interested McDonnell Douglas to the point where they felt that they could actually focus the field and have a lifting craft unto itself, but they're, for some reason, and I have this all in writing, of course, is that they somehow couldn't find the funding, and I honestly think, and my business partners felt that they just simply ran with the technology into black operations, which, I'm not into conspiracy theories that much, but then again, you hear so many different things over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's also, one of the things that's been very interesting is that, and again, with the lifter technology that I've been working with a lot, it's a very linear effect. The output thrust is very closely related to the input power and the size of the device. And in some ways, I've wondered, even though you're working with large levels of power, it's still difficult to really visualize, how, a few hundred watts or several thousand watts would lift a 70 or 80 pound cannonball. And so I thought, perhaps it is a dimensional doorway, a gateway to someplace else, or maybe just shifting things a little bit outside of space-time so that the effects don't work quite the same way. You think it might be related to Eugene Poglanov's work in Tampere, Finland?
I think it closely goes along that way, and also Rene Louis Vallée, who was a nuclear scientist working with Andrei Sakharov, in the 1980s put out a paper for Ferris Technologies, the company that I was working with, which was George Hathaway and Alex Pizarro, mentioning about space-time being twisted and bent. This paper was about 4 pages and was of great interest to the U.S. government.
Oh,
I should
okay.
have to get that posted sometime on the internet.
Yeah, definitely. And, well, in terms of equipment now, you mentioned Tesla coils, and those are, if I remember correctly, at least a few 100,000 volts, right? And then you also use a DC overlay where you have, is it just a static field, or,
sorry, Tim.
Oh.
I would use a high output electrostatics to fill the whole area with electrostatics, but then again, that doesn't explain why the effects happen outside of the laboratory and into other people's buildings and that.
Yeah,
and out on
definitely.
The street. Now, I was just doing something for fun a couple of weeks ago, and I was playing around with some of the equipment here, and I had a car alarm going off for about an hour until the police came around, and I shut everything off and just walked out the door and went downstairs, but I couldn't resist the temptation, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, it's amazing stuff, and one of the real advantages that you have is you've been able to buy a lot of stuff at the Navy surplus up in BC, and as a result, like I've seen a radar dish in your lab on a Discovery Canada show that Peter and Shira von Puttkamer filmed. Just an amazing device that most people definitely wouldn't have in their apartment, but
yeah. Oh my goodness, yes. It's sort of I'm the Dr. Frankenstein here. I'm lucky they haven't come around with torches yet to burn down the castle, so to speak. Because I've done some crazy stuff here. I had a toy flying saucer thing, same one on Discovery Canada, that I attached a high voltage wire to it and had it flipping around in here. I had a take-up spool on it so that the live wire wouldn't hit anything and cause a fire. Even that, unto itself, caused a local constabulary to come knocking on my door because I guess it causes RFI interference and that kind of thing. So.
Sure. Well, one of the mitigating factors, though, has to be, not only has the U.S. military been intensely interested in this, Nick Cook from Jane's Defense Review, one of the most prestigious publications, when he was doing research of his own, people at Lockheed had showed him the tape, and the interview that I'd seen with him was surprising because, he was very impressed not only by seeing the tape, but that it was being shown to him by someone at Lockheed, which kind of further illustrated that in kind of the very high-tech development circles, and unfortunately in some of the black ops circles as well, your research is definitely something that they're aware of and keep a focus on.
Oh, that's without question. I mean, I've had so many contacts over the years from different people in Black Ops. I don't know why it wound up in the hands of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works people, but I'd get such notations from Colonel Oliver North and all sorts of high-profile characters back in the eastern seaboard, and also overseas, too. A lot of letters and people coming. Actually, a lot of interesting people have come here, including a congressman, Berkeley Bedell, who's into alternative health. He was here visiting or talking, and he has a high interest in my research. And so I've had a lot of high-ranking characters come and go out of here, out of this tiny apartment, and also back in the old labs.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
probably hear a siren in the background. I don't think I have anything turned on, do I?
No, that's
No.
fine.
Good.
Yeah. I actually have a couple of contacts of my own who have expressed interest in, they've thought, if John ever has the time and they're ever in Vancouver, they've actually thought about planning a trip up there, which in some ways, I don't know, it must seem strange to have people dropping by from all over the world, but at the same time, it's so unique and so unexplained and so different. Well, in terms of your equipment, then, so you're using, you'd mentioned you had a 200,000 volt, probably, was that DC or AC generator?
Oh, that would be direct current. No, the main transformers had about 14 of them, and they were direct current, and also several were AC. Now, these things were available at surplus. Now, I have here up to maybe 100,000 volts I can produce, and then it's the electrostatics for the effects I did have here. But prior to that, these transformers weighed in at 1,500 pounds to 2 tons. And they were just simply things that were available for me to have for nothing, really.
Oh, okay. Well,
and they were really just the right moment, the right times, and these were big X-ray transformers that had DC output from them, which helped a lot in the latter part of the 1980s. Although smaller sizes would work just as well, but was just what was available from the scrapyards.
Well,
and also I did so much of my own engineering that machining of parts and pieces and that too, like I do here. And some of this is displayed in a journal called Electric Spacecraft Journal.
You'd mentioned that, and that was Charles Yost publishes that, doesn't he?
Yes, he published those results that I gave him. I'm thinking it goes back past 1995. And recent requests for those drawings. So I do have the magazine around somewhere, but they're really well-made drawings.
Oh,
of the
sure.
electrostatic generators, Tesla coils, and interferometers that I made.
Well, and it's kind of yet another piece of the puzzle for other experimenters out there trying to find their own version of this effect, or if nothing else, replicate it and show that it's not psychokinetic, that it's actually a real effect, and that you were able to do it because you have years of experience in working with this equipment.
That's right, and I'm just hoping that maybe somebody out there that goes into these journals can actually get the diagrams and maybe put up a website or just publish the diagrams all over the place. I have George Hathaway's diagrams, and then I have McDonnell Douglas aerospace diagrams, and then my own diagrams, which I sent into Charles Yost for publication in his magazine.
Oh, okay. So there's actually a lot of information out there, and I've seen your website. I can't remember offhand what the URL is.
Gee, Tim, I just got involved in computers a couple of years ago, and I didn't even know what an icon was, believe it or not. And I still don't know how to make a website. It's that everybody else so kindly put up websites on yours truly.
Well, yeah, including myself. I actually have a page on the Hutchison Effect, and I get emails all the time about it. People from all over the world saying, what's the key or what's the secret? And I have to write back and say, I have no clue. It's amazing, whatever it is. And it definitely seems like a scalar potential. And unfortunately, in some ways, that's an area of research that doesn't seem to have a lot of information.
Yeah, unfortunately, all the information, Tim, is in boxes here, and actually watertight containers. It's all paper documentation.
Oh, okay.
And video stock. I got tons and tons of videos that nobody's ever seen this stuff, and of levitations and experiments. Also, plus scientific papers that, it's a matter of trying to find somebody that is willing to go through the stuff and put it out or sort it out and put it on the internet or there's talk of a major film on yours truly, but I don't know when that'll be. But the potential for a fantastic information site at least is available, but again, it's transferring it to all the paper documentation out there. I mean, I got megatons of the stuff. It's quite interesting, even on other people's work, like Tom Beard and stuff right from Washington, D.C. I managed to get out of the database and stuff that people don't even know about. I had this contract with the U.S. government, and it gave me a privilege, and I said, put me on your mailing list at DTIC, the SBIR program, and I got all the neat stuff, over all the years since the 80s, and it's a shame that so much of this stuff is just sitting here.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that would be interesting is if someone could scan this stuff together and put it on an internet library of sorts for your video and documentation. I have to wonder if people going through that and reading the different documents might find some keys or some new ideas, things that might have never occurred to you because you're so close to the equipment. That by taking a step back and having the third party look at it, and again, not military scientists who are very rigorously trained in conventional physics, but actual inventors, people who are calculated risk takers, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot here. I mean, there's a lot of photographs, there's a lot of drawings, documents. Some of it is heavy physics from René Louis, Valet of France, and Sakharov. But again, there's the simplistic diagrams of McDonnell Douglas Aerospace Corporation and my own diagrams I drew in to Charles Yost and that would be quite helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, in terms of the effect, and again, I've seen things levitating, I've seen metals melting. Have there been anything else? You'd mentioned at one time, I believe, some minor time effects. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but...
Oh, time distortion effects, yes, we had those happen quite a bit, too. We've had entire things that appeared through the Max Planck Institute and Fraunhofer Labs. They were able to determine that this metal samples were through some kind of time distortion. The Canadian government's analysis of the 8mm film that Hathaway and myself and others took shows that some of the metal pieces are transparent. You can see through them. And this is old Super 8mm film. So there's a lot of different things that are quite interesting. Also, background radiation is reduced to a couple of counts per minute. We found that back out in, good heavens, 1989, when I was working with the Boeing group, yet another group. And that's also the time they managed to levitate a 1,500-pound transformer at least an inch off the floor. And that video, unfortunately, I don't have. We broke company, and I went off to Germany by invitation by Dr. Peter Kokoshinik, who's quite a brilliant scientist who basically did find ZPE energy fluctuations. And I was a guest at his villa in Hendorf in the state of Salzburg, Austria. So a lot has happened in regards to people going over stuff and testing and analyzing everything. And again, it's a shame that it's just sitting here, and a lot of famous scientists' names should be recognized also, I feel, that helped in helping me in the research.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's in some ways there's so much to it that it almost has to be a collaborative effort, where you have these results that realistically the data might not be completely analyzed for a century or more. It's really kind of a whole new branch of science. So right there in your apartment.
It is and I'd be happy even to have it on display somewhere, all of the papers and metal samples, and because I've got barrels of metal samples down in the locker room here, also that I feel I'd be happy to have them on display somewhere.
Oh. Yeah.
I mean, I don't need them. I do have my samples I take for traveling on lecture tours, but to have a place where you can actually display these things on a wall with all the test results along with it in papers would be fantastic.
Well, one thing that I've never heard asked, and it could just be because I, just didn't hear that particular interview, but have you ever had anything dangerous happen? I mean, one of the things that I've worried about is working with scalar potentials. Since the overlap areas of potential can really appear in random places, I'd almost wondered what would happen if one of those appeared, inside the human body or in a brick over someone's head or something. Have you ever had anything kind of close calls like that happen?
I myself did. It was like if I'm trying to visualize it. I had like having my arm stuck in a whirling pool of mercury or something like that. That's what it felt like. I'm trying to go by visualization and density of metals. And I happened to be moving my arm around to another knob on the main control panel in one of the big labs, and this effect happened. It felt like something was whirling around my arm, and it kind of hurt. But that's the only incident. I mean, we had television people in the big labs filming stuff. Their only concerns was would their cameras get exploded, and they checked it through their engineers, and they said, no, it should be okay. So we did many TV live demos like that on Canadian News, BCTV with Alan Edwards and Tony Parsons, and CKVU Television and CBC. Nothing happening to any of us, and also the scientists. We seem to be all in good health, along with my partner, George Hathaway, who, by the way, is actually writing a book on the Hutchison Effect.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you know what it'll be called when he releases it?
I believe The Hutchison Effect by George Hathaway.
Oh, okay. So rather obvious title then.
I'm kind of excited about that. I'm not sure how the context is going to be about, but he's doing all the analysis and stuff of more samples I gave him when he visited here just a couple months ago. And I actually just traded some surplus equipment for us. I gave him a couple of metal samples to take back to East there for him to analyze. So.
Well, one thing that I'd like to ask is, now that you're using the internet and, collaborating with others in news groups, as myself and a lot of other inventors are, one of the big questions is, are you really seeing hints from people's descriptions and internet videos and things, seeing hints of maybe the Hutchison effect on a smaller scale in other people's work, or things that are kind of reminiscent, the thing where sometimes I'll see something in the back of my mind that'll make me think, this really seems like it's tied together with something else. And I know that Bill Alec just released a video on the mystery spot, and there have been a lot of other videos and just reported claims and effects online. Have you ever come across anything and thought, well, this might be a component, or it reminds me somewhat of something I've seen?
Like your interview last night there, I listened to there. You're talking about spark gaps, and that was kind of my ears perked up about spark gap tech, because I had the same kind of work with my spark gaps by adjustment of them, and the energy potentials in your lifter tech is quite interesting unto itself. So it's getting very close in there, I feel, with what you guys are doing.
Well,
You're covering a lot of neat stuff there, and I was quite fascinated by listening to that good interview, and wow, that's interesting about the spark gaps and what you guys are achieving. Quite impressive.
I definitely appreciate it. One of the things that surprised me somewhat is, and it was something I didn't notice at first, the lifters do seem to have side effects, and it's one of those things that very few people like to report. We did testing with a shielded magnetometer, and we were unable to pick up the Earth's magnetic field while the lifter was operating, and we also had some unexplained signals in the background. And it's one of those things where when you mention it online, reports start pouring in from people all over the world saying, I had this happen and I can't really explain it. It's not really something that happens all the time. Another thing that I had happen, interestingly, was I've had sparks that appear out of nowhere. And in a way, they're almost not really bound in time at all. When I operate the lifter consistently for several days on end, I can turn it off, but there's a period of a week or so where I'll get unexplained electromagnetic effects. and they're uncommon enough and they're random enough that there's no really way to pin them down. But I've wondered if maybe, with on a much smaller power scale, if lifters might tie into some of the same effects that you've seen.
Oh, I would definitely say they do in some areas. Wouldn't be surprised sometimes somebody's going to discover something happening somewhere else. And when you mentioned about the energy in that too, I remember when the lab was turned off, our main lab, that we always had test equipment. So I turned on a spectrum analyzer, and good heavens, it seemed to be a source of energy still there, and it slowly dissipated over a half hour. And I know that all the main plasma capacitors were discharged and everything else was rested. And I was just scratching my head over that one. Sorry.
Oh, it's interesting that you mentioned that. One of the things that I usually don't like to talk about was when we had the magnetometer we were testing, the Earth's magnetic field didn't appear, and this was in about a 12-foot radius, I think, for about 15 minutes after we turned the lifter off. And we had done the same thing. We walked away scratching our heads. We tested it 3 or 4 times. We would run the lifter for about 5-10 minutes and turn it off, and there were no static effects in the area. I have very good discharge equipment, and I have a good discharge probe, and everything was shut down, cold. I was actually working on the lifter one of the times, repositioning it, so there was no residual that I could tell. But at the same time, about 15 minutes later, the magnetometer would start beeping again, and the beeping indicated that it could detect the Earth's magnetic field. The strange thing was, this thing was between 6 and 8 feet away from the lifter, and we tested it in a variety of positions, and we just couldn't pin down what it would be. It didn't seem to be static because, again, it was meant for high voltage experiments. It was shielded against static. Although at the same time, it's not impossible that it could have been affected.
Interesting that you influenced the geomagnetic field of the Earth, although it is rather weak in a way. Perhaps something was pressing it and pushing it away, although electrostatics do affect magnetic fields. It kind of reminds me of, when you were talking about that, when the equipment in the large labs that turned on, the background radiation would drop considerably down to a few counts per minute. So I did a walk-around test with a Geiger counter and found that it was a radius of roughly 75 feet. Unknown height to it. Did go on top of the building and got it same kind of reading, a couple of counts per minute. So when the equipment was then turned off, it would just go right back to its rough estimate, maybe 15 counts per minute or something like that, of ordinary background radiation.
Interesting. Well, one of the things that was associated, or I think now may have been associated, was at around the same time that we were testing the magnetometer, we were also testing an E-field meter. And when the lifter was running, we picked up an 8 megahertz signal, and it was really unexplained. We tested cell phones and the computer in the house and everything, and we couldn't find the source for it. It seemed to be just around the general area of the lifter. And that signal by itself wouldn't mean a whole lot, because the lifter is using a 30 kilohertz flyback, but it may have a harmonic there. But when we turned the lifter off, the signal went back up to 9 megahertz and then slowly dissipated. And that was something that was interesting.
My mind, when you just mentioned that, my mind went back to the Los Alamos team who picked up a signal. And I honestly forget what the frequency of the signal was. He said it's an odd signal, and I don't know what it means. He simply told me, and I thought, I'm not too sure what you mean either. It was up in the megahertz range. He didn't give me the amplitude of it or anything, but he just picked it up outside somewhere.
Yeah, interesting. It's one of the things that's kind of further made me wonder if frequency, what kind of a role frequency plays. Although, one of the things I've wondered about with the Hutchison effect was, again, since you run multiple equipment at once, and then you have kind of from what you've said, a general kind of E-field in the area from the high voltage static DC supplies, it really could be kind of an overlap or harmonic signal also.
Yes, it was a lot of work in when I made the chance discovery. I just thought, what the heck was going on here? And I honestly didn't think much of it at the time until Pizarro and Hathaway got involved, and the whole military-industrial complex got involved, and then I started to get inspired and basically fine-tuned it over years of time and found that the electrostatic energy is extremely important especially RF fields and how you present them, meaning that sawtooth formations and amplitude and that, and how you present them onto the actual antenna structures. That's why I'd always be machining different types of antenna structures, which could be a mass of metal with a geometry to it. It's quite intriguing. So it got quite involved up to, well, the time I left for Europe, and the lab was to follow with me to this special place in Austria, but of course then it was taken away by the Canadian government characters against a court order too.
Oh, okay. Well, back to time effects for just a sec, because that's something that's been intensely interesting to me. But have you ever had the equipment turned off and then had an effect happen either before or after?
Oh, had some strange stuff like that happening. Stuff like stuff turning transparent, a whole building disappearing. It sounds too far out even to talk about, but at least it's verified by the Boeing Aerospace Group.
Oh, so it actually affected the entire building then? Maybe a light effect or just maybe displacing it?
I don't know. It seems to repeat itself, this disappearance, like the Canadian government analysis of the tape shows that these metal samples turn transparent. And the Max Planck Institute, on their analysis of the samples, said there's a transparency within the metal grain itself in dense areas. What that means, I don't know. I have the paper somewhere.
Yeah.
And then again, a building disappearing and reappearing, much like it almost sounds like a repeat of the Philadelphia experiment. But you know, what can I say? I didn't see it happen, except the insurance agents and the Boeing group told me this. I said, "Oh, I am not aware of it."
Oh, well.
Same as I was not aware of the Super 8 film. After the government analyzed it, I, of course, got some of those results from DSTI, Dr. Lauren A. Kuhn, who I'm trying to trace down now to find the actual videos that they took when they visited me in March 1986. So there are some kinds of after effects that happen, and it gets kind of frustrating in some ways because then you get neighbors banging on your door and saying they hear these weird sounds in their home.
Yeah.
we had this problem before. This is happening here, but before, of course, it was people in the industrial area that had housing would get upset and thought we had a huge stamping machine running or something.
Oh, okay.
I guess they didn't comprehend that there was a lab in there, and they'd leave nasty notes on our door saying, "Whatever you're doing, it's wrecking our dishes." So Alex Azaro would cover his mouth and start laughing so hard, and so would I. I said, "Oh, I guess we kind of moved their dishes around or made them fly across the room or something."
Well, I've wondered a lot about the Philadelphia experiment, and I was very impressed with, I've always been impressed by the Al Bielek interview that Art Bell did a while ago, but the strange thing was, and I guess there have been a lot of people who have revisited the Philadelphia experiment and said that parts of it are a myth, but the interesting thing for me has been that Bielek's description of the Philadelphia experiment, which actually has corroboration from several people, apparently, the original cultural legend, I guess, that's been around since the 40s, had people disappearing through bulkheads and had metals melting, and pretty much a wide array of the same effects that the Hutchison Effect has. And the interesting thing for me had been this myth has really been around since, from what I can tell, the 1940s. That's when the stories started to really surface about these strange effects. And, it meshes so well with the actual real demonstrable evidence that you've had that I've wondered if maybe the rotating magnetic field equipment or whatever it was they're using might have matched up somehow, created the same effect.
I think so. I really honestly think so, because the French did an experiment with a rotating magnetic field at the speed of light within an electrostatic field and got some results. And there's also the mystery spot being investigated, but also there's an incident that was investigated by a full team of scientists in Booker Bay, Australia, where people were literally being pushed around by some unknown force, and light would appear from nowhere. Metals would turn soft, this is all documented by Dr. Hal Pudoff, who I know, Paul Devereaux, in 1995 in Booker Bay, Australia. This information was sent to me by Mr. Harrington, and the copy of the report is with one of my friends that used to work with me on the experiments. So it's a documented case. The other one is the famous Canadian mystery spot that the Canadian government, literally, people would walk into this area and disappear. And what they did, this is on the news actually some time ago, they came in and covered everything with concrete.
Oh, okay.
So anybody couldn't go into the spot and then disappear. Now this is verbal from people that saw the program. I didn't see the program, but it does ring a slight bell about it.
Yeah.
And for the government to go in there and pour in tons and tons and tons of concrete to keep people away, and because it became such a hazard, just oddly enough, that people would just simply walk in there and disappear. But the Booker Bay one is quite an interesting parallel to use with the Hutchison Effect.
Well, I'd done a correlation study early last year, and I really started looking at, I tried not to really discriminate in terms of credibility. I tried to look at just the entire array of anti-gravity reports, and, including both the ones that I thought were probably bunk and then ones that probably weren't, and just tried to look for common effects that might validate a lot of these. And in some ways, I found kind of rotating magnetic fields as the thing that runs through these as the common factor. And a lot of the side effects that I'd seen, a lot of the side effects that are reported, again, from people who haven't met each other, don't really know about each other's work, some of them dating back 20, 30, 40 years, others just happening, months or weeks ago, included stuff like a black fog or a black corona, and that was really interesting. I thought maybe it was the light was actually being shifted by a gravity field. The other one was like the Hutchison Effect, tons and tons and tons of lift. These things would take off, and I like to call it real anti-gravity, where not only does it lift off, it takes the table with it. But really strange effects, and a lot of these seem to tie into the Hutchison Effect in some ways. But it's interesting that you mentioned the rotating magnetic fields, because that's been kind of a pet area of investigation for me for a while.
It is interesting, the rotating magnetic fields, and for them to travel at the speed of light would indicate something in an Einsteinian equation, I would think. But within an electrostatic field, this has to happen. Now, I used to use weak magnetic fields simply to steer the electrostatic energy that was being produced into. I just wanted to steer it in the right direction, basically away from certain equipments.
Oh, okay. So literally just using coils to push ions or things with a slight charge away from a certain sensitive piece of equipment. Then.
Yeah, I had a beautiful supply of traveling wave tube units, and with huge electromagnets that took just a little bit of power. And I used to start to pulse these things too. I guess I got quite involved in the latter years with this stuff, and I guess that would explain why then that within an hour we have maybe 5 major effects per hour.
Oh, okay.
Some of them lasting up to 15 minutes. We'd have such things as stainless steel bars being twisted in knot or falling apart, and actually these things are seen right on video.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of those, and they're very impressive. I actually had an occasion. I've studied a few different ways to focus scalar fields, and not being really an expert in that area, I've never been sure, what would really work. But I did have one occasion where I was actually attempting to build the Naudan UFO lifter, and it was a very simple design. It was just a corona wire running around the outside of a UFO-shaped 2 paper plates glued to each other, and I had a flat piece of aluminum on the bottom. And strangely enough, this thing was hanging sideways, and when I turned it on, unfortunately, it didn't create any lift. But what it did create, strangely, I was not expecting this at all, was a directional beam of static. And I'd wondered if maybe that was one of the scalar effects, where this beam, when it happened, It was initially pointing over my left arm, and it traveled over my left arm, over my chest, and then down my other arm. And I could feel actually that the hair raising on my body where the beam was pointing, and then when it reached the tip of my right hand, which was on my voltage supply, the supply actually blew up. So I haven't tested it since then because it was expensive to replace, but I'd wondered, have you ever tried focusing the scalar effects using?
Oh, yes. Sometimes it's interesting results for what you kind of described there too. Actually, we'd have what we call flameouts on a dumbbell Tesla coil, and a V-shaped thing. This cone would appear a black, smoky, fiery stuff, and it'd go into the ceiling. I mean, I can understand what you're saying about things like that happening to you. We had, during the U.S. government test, 3 power supplies blow up, although Tom Bearden said they were sabotaged. But we'd have banks of light that would go, lights that light up and explode. But, that brings back memories, yes. Actually, I smoke, and I was smoking a pipe one time and had all my tobacco come flying out of the pipe, along with the embers, due to the interesting electrostatics and guidance of the electrostatic energies and that.
Sure. Well, and smoke particles actually react very well in terms of demonstrating fields. One of the tests that I've been doing with the lifters is actually just using pyrotechnics, smoke bombs, just 4th of July smoke bombs in my case. And if I hold these above the lifter, it will actually do kind of an electrostatic paint job with the lifter. And it works well for TV filming because the crew will come over and the lifter starts out silver. And not only do they get a nice demonstration of smoke flowing through the lifter, but the lifter ends up purple or blue or a mixture of colors. So I've had good experience with smoke as a means of really showing kind of what the electrostatic effects are doing.
Actually, quite interesting what smoke will do when you put it in there. I remember George Hathaway bringing, I think it was titanium something or other, or vanadium dioxide. I can't remember. It was a smoke bomb thing you throw in there, and then I never used it though. Although when we were filming way back there with Super 8mm, we had multicolor stuff come descending all around us, and this was caught on Super 8mm film.
Oh, okay.
And later on, we actually started nicknaming the colored things that would be floating around, and we used to call them Carl. This red thing would come up from the ground and go through the ceiling. Sounds like something out of a science fiction movie, but it happened,
Well, one of the things that, and I guess the Hutchison Effect may tie into this somewhat, was, the Earth currents, telluric currents, and the way the Earth's magnetic field interacts with these is still a poorly understood area of science. But from my understanding, there are things like, for instance, there's I think it is 1,000,000 volt per foot potential difference between the ionosphere and the ground. And one example that I've seen of tapping this is a 6-foot pole with an LED that you drive into the ground, and it charges for, during the daylight hours, essentially. And then at night, the LED actually lights up. And it doesn't produce a lot of power. And on a cloudy day, you probably won't have any light the following evening. But it demonstrates that, there are these fields all around us. And so things coming up from the floor actually sounds like it could be tied into the Earth's natural fields.
Oh, I think so. I've been reading about Tesla's work where he's talking or mentioned the same kind of thing, and using specially treated plates of copper that you suspend in the air. However, our common friend here, Art Bell, has discovered that he can pull out 400 volts direct current of energy with a 1,000-foot loop antenna suspended in the air. And on this 400 volts direct current, he gets a small ripple of AC of unknown origin. He doesn't know what it was. He's telling me on the phone.
Oh, I remember you mentioning that, and I'd wondered, partially, I've heard rumors that Project HARP is up in Alaska. The rumor was, apparently, that they have a nuclear reactor connected directly to this antenna array, and they're putting current to the Earth and the air at the same time. So I've wondered if maybe some of these unexplained effects, not necessarily with yours, because you got actually tons of effects before HARP ever went online, but some of the effects like Art had. I've wondered if maybe, it wasn't some of this energy that the government has been pumping into the Earth. The idea with HARP, from what I understand, is geological testing, although the rumor also suggests that they can shoot down missiles with it. Interestingly, HARP is believed to be a scalar device, and so in some ways, I guess it would be tied in with the stuff that you work with.
Well, HARP is actually, they lift the ionosphere with the project that was actually I'm told it was for communication to submarines, and then it was used to try and reverse the polarity of the ionosphere, which they actually did do, according to the ham radio operators.
Oh, okay.
And there's a great danger that if they punch through that and go into the Van Allen belt, that they could cause a Ben Franklin effect by bringing down all its energy to the Earth and stalling the Earth's geomagnetic field. One point I'd like to make, however, too, about these random energy that Tesla and Art Bell and others have discovered. Art went back in time and actually copied an old diagrams of some ham radio operator, and that said that the same thing happened prior to HARP. So I think between Art Bell and Tesla, they're in this ham radio operator. And I did the same thing with a long wire antenna to a tree, about 50 feet of wire connected to a large tree, dead center. You can actually extract a lot of energy from that tree. It picks up the ground waves and then the sky waves out there.
Yeah, you'd mentioned charging capacitors with that, hadn't you?
Oh, we actually fired up a Tesla coil, specially made Tesla coil, that had a delay with large capacitors, the old style they used in computers that were around 300,000 microfarads at 26 volts. And these things would charge up amazing amounts of energy, were converted into about 14 volts DC, and it would run radios and small motors. That was sort of a side project we'd do before we go on to the main experiments with the levitation.
Well, one of the things that I'd meant to ask you about, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, was I have an acquaintance who's been playing with smoke detector cells as a means of creating a beta voltaic battery, and I wondered if you'd ever heard of that. I guess Paul Brown had done a lot of research into that. He was working with strontium-90, but apparently there are a variety of different experiments that are out there that utilize these low-grade radioactive emitters. Is there anything that you've done that might tie into that you could talk about, or would that be related more to the government stuff?
No. I've actually, during all my experiments, I used a small radioactive source. And this radioactive source, which was basically common ore, and I'd get a reading, pretty strong reading, at least roughly about 2 feet away from it. And then I got more involved into research into atomics, as I call it, and subatomic sciences, and made a special ball to house this material with a milled-out window that was very thin so that I could actually rotate the ball in different directions with this alpha-beta.
Oh, okay.
And I had a high-voltage source into it that was basically a magnetron that was manually pulsed. And this seemed to enhance some of the effects. And as I got really involved into it, I felt that, and also Dr. Wilson of DREP, Defense Region Establishment Pacifica, felt that the alpha and beta were being collected into a round ball and carried by the electrostatics to affect the object. Then the other scientist, Dr. Kuhn, said, oh, no, that can't do that. They were always in argument about something like that. But I always used a small radioactive source in the experiments. Sure.
Well, the only reason I mentioned it was, I've heard rumors from the few people that I've met who have experimented with things like that, but I guess the entire principle of the beta voltaic emitter, in theory, violates the idea that radioactive decay happens on a very random basis, but statistically predictable. The device that I'd seen could actually be hooked up to an oscilloscope, and once it was primed with just charge from the flyback, it would actually ring on the oscilloscope and produce more energy. So the idea of interactions between electricity, and especially high voltages, and these nuclear substances, even in tiny amounts, was kind of an interesting correlation. I've heard that oil companies have patents on these, although the reasons vary as to why they haven't pursued them. Some people have said it's conspiracy theories. More likely, it's probably just they don't know what to do with them. But
I've seen actually patents on a small radioactive source to enhance radio reception. There's certain mil-spec vacuum tubes that have a small amount of radiation in them, radioactive compounds to enhance the electron flows and all that. I have such vacuum tubes laying around somewhere.
Oh,
I've seen a lot of stuff in relation to that, yes. This fellow way back on, I think in the 30s, had a patent on a special antenna-enhancing device that used radium chloride, and this would bring in radio signals to the ham radio operators for many times more strength. And I visualize that, I've seen the patent, and I think perhaps it'd probably be in the archives with George Hathaway now. That was quite interesting. There's a lot of stuff with alpha and beta. I actually have a handheld device that's used for detection of electrostatic fields that uses a tritium source of 200 millicuries. And you just simply hold this thing and it'll activate. If you go close to a electrostatic source, it'll show on the meter this handheld thing that looks like a space gun that shows you how many ions there are and the polarity of them and that kind of thing too. So there's quite a correlation between magnetics and electrostatics and these weak forces of nuclear material.
Well, these are unrelated though to the crystals that you've worked on, right? You have power crystals that produce, from what I've heard, it's an unexplainable energy source, and people have actually been purchasing these. I guess you sell them occasionally. But they actually, I'm not sure if you're still selling them or if it was just for a few people to investigate.
Oh, no, I was selling them to the Japanese. I sold over 100 of these things. I got involved in that because I was approached by people that were being ripped off by another person who was saying basically that, we have this guy with pieces of plywood with magnets flying around. I said, forget it. I said I can basically, with non-moving part technology, guarantee you a milliamp and 1 electron volt. So I just basically thought, what would I do if I was on a desert planet kind of situation? Then I made up these crystal converters, which seem to capture all types of energy, converts it into direct current. And it's speculated by the Kyoto Institute of Technology and other people in Japan that they work on 0 point. And it seems to confirm it to Dr. Franklin Mead's patent on his unit that collects 0 point energy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, somebody in a news group once had questioned whether or not those might have some kind of doping that would make them somewhat like a beta voltaic. But I guess in a lot of ways that probably wouldn't explain the output that you're able to produce with them. And they also glow, don't they? Or is that an LED that you're using to light them up as they operate?
Oh, on the good ones, on the real expensive ones, which were funded by the Japanese and the Germans, they will light up an LED and run a small motor. I gave a demo in Japan in 1995 in Hiroshima City. It was the 50th anniversary of one of my units, and basically fired it up, and it ran very well. And after the demonstration, without hesitating, I took the thing all apart because what good is a demonstration if you got to show that there's no batteries in it. So with 2 TV cameras on me, I just went right on and let her rip, and pull the thing apart.
Oh, sure. Well,
and then, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, have you ever tested these with the Hutchison Effect, or when you have the equipment running? And have you had any unexplained effects when you did that?
Actually, we did. Actually, these things go back in time to germanium diodes. We used to use them as detectors for the Hutchison Effect.
Oh, okay.
And then we got into making our own type of detectors, and we walk around with these things and found that we could detect energy come off the side of buildings, energy coming from nowhere. And then later on, of course, one of the partners took off with one of these detectors and made himself $70 million forming Pinnacle Oil International because they were used for detection of oil, gas, and minerals. And this was also an insult to George Hathaway and Alex Pizarro, who had the older version of this, which was a vacuum tube unit that would pick up these same types of energy from the Earth.
Yeah.
So Pinnacle Oil is no more because the unit broke down and it all sort of went by the wayside, but the power cells, they do modulate with different, if you walk around with them, they will modulate. And so that gave me the idea of, well, what can I market a tricorder for kids and that kind of thing? Get everything out there without being stopped by oil companies, and this is a simple toy.
Oh, definitely. Well, and if they do modulate energy like this, there's always even if it's remote, the possibility that you could use it as a focusing or amplifying device for the Hutchison Effect, so that the effects that you're able to produce with the equipment then could be projected, in a sense, to a smaller area. And that would be an interesting idea. If you're ever able to test with larger scale equipment again. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're fun detectors and also fun for a lot of people. And I would say a rough version of them could be actually had through fair radio sales in Ohio, meaning that there's a compound that sort of emulates it, but it's not as strong as the tiny little batteries they make. It's called Barium Titanate, and fair radio sales in Ohio used to sell these cylinders. They're about 7 pounds each for $29 only, and good grief, you get 1,000 volts out of one of those things. I put one in a refrigerator one time, Tim, and just demonstrating it, and I went in later to grab it, and the voltage went through my hand and out through my foot into the floor here. So I just thought I'd mention that for anybody who's interested in playing in this area of alternative energy, that a good source of parts and pieces and stuff is fair radio sales in Ohio.
Oh, okay. You also mentioned with barium titanate, what surprised me there is people have been using that in lifters also, as a dielectric, I believe. But it's something they've attempted a few times. I've seen probably 10 or 15 different references to it.
Can I mention something rather important that the U.S. government did?
Oh, absolutely.
It's written up in the Electric Spacecraft Journal. What they did, and of course they patented the barium titanate, but they took round balls of the material that were several feet in diameter, and it was very thin-walled. I think it was half an inch thick, as I remember. And so what they would do is put 4 of these balls out in a desert area, and then they'd take a 5th ball of the material and put it in the center of the square, and it would actually levitate itself up off the desert floor. This was a U.S. Army experiment done a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
Back in the 60s, and it's written up in the Electric Spacecraft Journal. Now, that might have some key info for you people that are into levitation.
So it was just a small amount of barium titanate then that was able to levitate, or am I misinterpreting?
I think Tim, it was pure barium titanate that they manufactured. It was quite an engineering project.
Oh, okay. And
it was thin-walled, and somehow they were to levitate the 5th ball. It's like if you took the 4 balls and make a rectangle outside in the desert area, and then put the 5th ball right dead center within the floor of the rectangle, then this 5th one apparently levitated off.
Well, one thing it may be related to this, and I'd meant to ask earlier actually, was relating to the rotating magnetic fields. I've seen more and more lately on vortexes, and I guess it relates to a variety of different areas, everything from vortex theories of physics to actual vortex projects. There's an energy cell out there that someone has been working on that apparently uses some of this technology, and I'd wondered if you'd ever worked with vortex dynamics at all, or if that might play a role in some experiments that you'd done.
Oh, with actually making my own vortexes. Is that what you're trying to say, Tim?
Well, yeah. It would be interesting to see. I've seen lots of different apparatus that should make vortex effects to some degree. Some of them as simple as a round emitter in a magnetic field, and then others are much more complex. But it'd be interesting. I've seen references. Nick Cook had mentioned vortex dynamics with the Victor Schaumburg experiments, apparently back in the 20s or 30s. But it would be interesting to see if you'd ever had any effects with those.
I think we did actually have those kind of effects. We have such things as like fire things shooting out through the concrete floors. Victor Schauberger actually is quite a hero in Austria. His work is still being actually demonstrated over there. And my ex, who's a filmmaker, her dad was into Vortex technology, and I saw the lab. Very impressive laboratory. All these types of vortex machines and stuff. So a lot going on in Europe in regards to Schauberger stuff. But going back to these fire things that would come out of the floor, it looked like a whirling vortex. And also from the tops of the Tesla coils, the previously mentioned flameouts from the dumbbells looked like a vortex. And one time, during the U.S. government tests, we went into the lab and turned everything on and found that the energy into all the machines was a lot stronger. And every time I'd start, I'd say, Alex, I thought I got to shut things off because something's not right here. And then I would turn it all on again, and it would get more energy. And Alex I got really concerned because the coils were starting to bulge, and extra sparks were happening, huge balls of fire coming out of the stuff. So Pizarro said, I better go check the mains. And he came back. He says, you won't believe this, John, but nothing's not even plugged in. I said, Alex, you've got to be joking. I said, Alex, come on, stop it. And I went around the corner, and sure enough, all the plugs were out of the, wall. And Alex said, you got to turn it on again. I said, okay. And then he wanted me to turn it on again, and I said, no. Look, I understand these things. They're going to go. They're going to explode. We'll take this building out. I said, I'm out of here, and I don't think it's wise to turn it on, and you can talk to Colonel Alexander about it. But I'm this is a little too far out for me. So Alex decided to come with me, shut everything off, and disappear.
Sure.
That was kind of scary, actually. That's one of the scariest moments. When I seen that happen, and things weren't even plugged in, I thought I was hallucinating at first. And then we just had a lot of spooky things happen to us in regards to that kind of thing. Well, not plugged in, and it still works, and it's stronger. It doesn't seem to make any sense.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. I've seen, maybe it's related to flickering lights and just ambient energy. Although it is really in the unexplainable category. Well, I'm all out of questions for today. I wanted to say thanks. I sincerely appreciate your time. Is there anything you wanted to say to kind of wrap up, or?
Well, it'd be really nice, Tim. It's nice talking with you always, and I really appreciate you having the website there helping me out a bit there and presenting my work. It's just that I wish that with all these videos and documents that weren't more or less out there for everybody to enjoy.
Oh yeah, well, and you having a lab, a real, large-scale lab that you're able to really work with these things. That's one of the things that I would hope to see in the future, is that someone, a financier out there, or someone with the interest in the capital might be able to help in some way, But just with the renewed popularity of the Hutchison Effect, I expect that's probably something that'll come along in the near future, anyways. So.
Well, I sure hope so. It'd be kind of fun to even donate this stuff to some museum somewhere. But we'll see what happens. I'm sure that magical things always happen, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, and just to close up, you tend to post in the New Electrogravity group on Yahoo Groups. And do you have any contact info that you'd like to give out to people, or?
Well, I do a little bit of posting as I'm a bit of a computer idiot. I don't know what I'm doing half the time with computers and groups and that. But I do post, I manage to post quite well on Rumor Mill News. I have a site there. And I post different topics I feel that people would be interested in. Could be anything from engineering to machine tools to Electrogravitics or something interesting somebody says. And it's Rumor Mill News Agency, where people can go there and check out my forum.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks again for your time, John. And I definitely like to interview you again at some point in the future. And but again, I sincerely appreciate your time and your thoughts. And on behalf of pretty much everybody who's ever seen your videos, thank you for doing the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you for encouragement, and you guys keep away at it, and you'll discover amazing things. I guarantee it.
Okay, thanks again.
Okay, Tim. Take care.
Okay, bye.